A recent survey shows that only 23% of employed game developers are women. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce a woman who is slaying it in the industry, Daria Fluor-Scacchi. Daria is a production manager at ILMxLAB with a passion for developing shared experiences in games and new media. For the last 11 years, she has honed her production skills working on nearly all media platforms in the free-to-play game industry, and is now bringing this development expertise to the next digital frontier, virtual reality. Today, Daria will talk about women in the digital games industry. We will leave time for questions at the end, and we'll do another drawing. But feel free to tweet your questions with hashtag AskBOGS17. Please help me in welcoming Daria Fluor-Scacchi.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. Yes, so as Beth mentioned, I'm Daria Fluor-Scacchi, working at ILMxLAB as a production manager. I'm currently working on Star Wars Secrets of the Empire, which is a virtual reality experience that will be launching at Downtown Disney and Disney Springs in Orlando. So I'm here today to talk about women in the games industry, and perhaps a bit why there's not so many of us. And to be brief, my belief is sexism, in short. It's a problem within both the game industry, but the tech industry, and arguably still has some shadows left in our culture on whole. So what I want to do today is share with you some experiences that I've had in dealing with sexism over the course of my career. What I would have wanted to hear when I was in school was someone like me, perhaps a woman, but a nerd would be fine, who could come up and tell me what it was exactly I was going to be signing up for, give me some real, honest insights as to what it would be like once I put my foot in the door. So that's what I'll be covering in my talk today. And I hope you will see by the end of the talk why, despite this particular issue still plagues us, why I'm optimistic. Oops, sorry, missed that. So, starting in 2006 is when I got my first job in the games industry. I wasn't entirely sure exactly what I wanted to do. I have a degree in studio art, and I had, of course, considered pursuing that, but I wasn't quite sure. As I was starting out, I realized quickly that I seemed to have a natural skill set for production, and so in a dinner conversation with my father, I mentioned that I was curious about production, and he told me about this woman, Jade Raymond, who was becoming increasingly known for her work on Assassin's Creed. In fact, Ubisoft basically made her the unofficial mascot of the game. So the suggestion was I follow her career and model myself after her. In 2007, a comic was posted on the website Something Awful featuring Jade Raymond. This is a pretty horrible comic. I'm not going to go into a description of what she was depicted as. Feel free to look it up, but no, it is horrendous. Seeing this happen was a shock to me. I was horrified. Here, I had thought that the games industry was more matured than this, and something so horrible had happened to a woman who I was trying to follow, and I did not want something like that to happen to me. I was scared, and it was odd. It was so well known in industry news. It was all they could talk about. But no one around me mentioned it. The company didn't acknowledge that this had taken place. And the result was I felt really alone. In fact, I considered quitting the industry altogether at that time. I needed the support and I didn't have any. But I had to resolve within myself that I would not let these people who I did not know, who were not attacking me personally, drive me from an industry I had spent so much time preparing myself for. So to that, I would suggest to anyone facing any kind of visible or invisible oppression, don't let the bastards grind you down. Fast forward to 2010, I'm now working in the Bay Area, and I just started a new job. I was out one night with some colleagues when we happened to stumble upon the co-founder of the company and one of the chief executives, as well as a person who they had been interviewing to lead the Brazilian office. They invited us to join in their celebrations. They were hoping that this night was the night that this new person would be accepting the offer to take the job to lead our operations in Brazil. So we accepted the invitation. After all, it seemed like it would be a fun night. When I was pulled aside by the executive of my company, and he said to me, "Get him drunk. Make sure he has a good time." At that moment, I felt a lot of pressure. I knew this was really important to the company, that he accept the position. And this made me feel weirdly important, like I could do something to directly benefit the company in kind of a fun setting. However, by the end of the night, after multiple and increasingly aggressive sexual advances, all of which were refused, I ended up leaving the club afraid that I was not going to have a job when I came back Monday morning. So the next business day, I went to HR and I made mention of the incident, and regrettably, that did not work out very well for me. While nothing happened, I learned that HR is just a necessary evil, and you should and you must report these sorts of incidences, but ultimately, I was left unsatisfied. I made a mistake that night. Knowing what I know now, I should have refused to be taking any part in getting someone I didn't know drunk and to try to ensure they had a good time. And I had to become okay with the fact that I made that mistake. We're all human. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to not let them get you down and to get right back up. Jumping forward to 2014, I'm an employee of Kabam when calamity strikes again. Gamergate makes national news, and if you are unfamiliar with Gamergate, it's a little too complicated for me to go into at the time that I have today. Needless to say, I do not believe that it's about ethics in game journalism. Now, this was a little different. This was a scandal that was factually worse than something awful. Instead of attacking one woman, they went after three. Regrettably, the third one is cut off in this image. And they were viciously attacked online. They were doxxed, and some of them even fled their homes in fear for their personal safety. The mission of these attackers was to silence anyone who would speak out in defense of women in the game industry space, either as a developer or even potentially as a player. Once again, I was disappointed and I was scared, but I was also really angry. I wanted to do something, but I was afraid to speak publicly. I didn't want to feel any retaliation for something like this. As the scandal hit national news, the co-founder and chief people officer of Kabam sent out an email to the women's alias asking what our thoughts were on Gamergate. Well, and I had some thoughts. I sent back a very long response to everyone on the alias. First time I'd ever said anything to any executive of the company. And I explained how disappointed I was as an industry that we had not evolved past this just yet. And that I was kind of put out that this email was sent just to the women's alias as opposed to the whole company. The result of this was a 30-minute one-on-one with her where she asked me what I thought that the company should do. I told her that I wanted to know that the company had my back. And so an all-hands meeting was called, and they brought up all of the executives and had them candidly speak to what their thoughts were on Gamergate. This was really encouraging. I kept working with the chief people officer, and I pushed for an inclusive session to discuss about thoughts and feelings for Gamergate. She asked me, well, but women don't feel safe. Why do you want to have men there? And I said, we already don't feel safe. Seeing our allies will make us feel better. I learned a really important lesson. Speaking up is imperative if you have the will to do so, and not everyone has the will to do so. By speaking up, I hopefully was able to speak for those who were either not willing or not able. If and when you find your voice, I encourage you to do the same. Now we're at today. Lucasfilm really is different. You're looking at the leadership of Lucasfilm. I interviewed at ILMxLAB, and that was the beginning of the differences in what I noticed about Lucasfilm. I was interviewed by 2 men and 2 women, and that was a career first to have an interview panel that was 50-50. As I was considering accepting this position at XLab, you can bet that I did take this element into account as to whether I would take that position versus other positions that were offered to me. Stepping onto the campus, I noticed that something was different, and I had my inaugural session with my former manager where she had the opportunity to meet me and I had the opportunity to ask her questions. And she asked me, well, what do you think? What are your initial thoughts? And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, there's a lot of women here. And she laughed and said, yes, women run this company. Sure enough, examining my own chain of command, from myself all the way up to the head of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, every single person is a woman. I find this really exciting, personally, and I think it's very hopeful. It's difficult to examine and therefore try to smash a glass ceiling if it doesn't actually exist. Over the course of both my career and personal journeys, I've learned to make better and better decisions for myself and my career. My experiences have helped put me on a path for more success, and as you advance, mature through your career, know that if the first thing doesn't work out, it will get better. Looking to the future, I am truly, genuinely optimistic. In my 10+ years of experience, I've witnessed firsthand that it's gotten better. And while you could compare and contrast the Something Awful Jade Raymond versus Gamergate and say that it's getting worse, I would tell you that as the old mindset dies, its death throes get louder. I also think that virtual reality will help drive the industry forward to become more inclusive. In games, one typically plays as someone else. That's part of the fantasy that games offer. But in VR, what we're finding is that you have the most successful, immersive experiences when you allow the player to be themselves. For my own project, we are keeping in mind that people who attend Disneyland recreationally are 50-50 men and women. We therefore expect our experience to be widely attended by a very diverse audience. And also, just gender diversity of really any kind is good for business. What we are starting to see, some studies come out that show companies that are more diverse, especially at the top, that have women on their boards, do better financially. And I think that this is because women offer perspectives, insights, and contributions that are not necessarily present with a mostly male organization. Finally, the funnel is widening. More and more women of younger and younger demographics are being told about games and that the games industry is a viable place to pursue a career. I now try to do a little bit of youth outreach when I can, and one year I was working at PAX demoing the game that I was working on at the time, Star Wars Uprising, when a girl and her father came up and were playing the game. The father noticed that the back of my shirt read developer, and he alerted his daughter, oh, she actually works on the game. And the daughter put down the iPad for a second and looked at me and said, really? I said, yes. She's actually on the game. I said, yes. And wide-eyed, she exclaimed at how cool that was. So I'd like to think I've inspired perhaps at least one person. So to wrap this up, I'd like to pass on a few key things that I think would be useful to anyone considering a game industry career. While this is a bit unfortunate, having thick skin is genuinely beneficial. It's a lot easier to go day to day when you can brush off the smaller grievances. I have also found in my personal experience that the larger a company is, generally, the attitudes are better. If you are working at a small company and you get a certain vibe out of your colleagues, you can safely bet that that sort of attitude and behavior is reflected all the way up to the top. Finally, build a support network. When I was going through school, there were really not that many women, girls, interested in going into games, and I didn't really have the opportunity to create a support network. But if you can find a mentor, teachers are a great place to start. Do so and stay attached to them. They can give you some really excellent insights, or at least just share their experiences that might be useful for you to hear. And in any times of strife, it's just really nice to have someone who can listen and can relate. And hell, if you can't find anyone, email me, I'll respond. And finally, we all gotta help each other, regardless of where you're at in life, how you identify in your gender. Help and support one another. And if you can, and you're willing to speak, you can inspire others, as I hope to do today. Thank you.
In the office where you had different expectations than your male counterparts, or when you were in a situation where you felt that you had to represent women as a whole in the industry, which would not happen to a man in the same experience?
Well, I certainly have been asked what my opinion is because of the fact that I am a woman, and I've had colleagues who suggest that because I am a woman, I can therefore speak on behalf of all women, which I always retort with, I'm not comfortable representing all women, I am just one. But I cannot think of any other specific examples where I had different expectations versus my male colleagues.
I put you on the spot. Is this on? Let's just do this.
As someone who has worked in information technology for a long time and has firsthand seen the kind of sexism you've talked about, I appreciate you taking the time and effort today to discuss this with us. And my big question for you is, at any point did you ever have or experienced something that was helpful from a male ally, somebody who wasn't a woman that did something to help you navigate this or to counter any of the issues that you've encountered?
Yes, thank you very much for asking, because actually what helped start me on this journey was one of my male colleagues and now close personal friend who told me while I was still very early on in my career that he was making it his personal mission to see women succeed and would try to rope any woman he knew who might be interested in tech to come specifically to gaming. And then when they were in the door, at any opportunity he had to speak to their abilities, he would do so. And I initially reacted kind of negatively. I was like, well, why would you give special treatment to women? I don't want special treatment. And his response was, there's just not enough for you to not get special treatment. We have to put a finger on the scale in order to start evening it out. And I have to say I would agree with that at this point.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Hello. There was an article this week in Sports Business Journal, and a number of my students happened to see it, and in investigating current events, they asked me about it in particular, and that was the study showed that women somehow were less likely to negotiate for salary. So I'm wondering what your experiences have been. Sometimes I question the data set on that, but the reality is, what have your experiences been, especially since you've moved, you've had some different corporate moves and new jobs outside of those organizations?
Sure, thank you for the question. And I will be honest that I don't have a ton of experience in negotiating for a better salary. I have certainly negotiated and was able to leverage higher pay. That was due to the fact that I was basing it off of my previous salary and would emphasize that I would deserve the money that I was asking for because of my qualifications, and that I bring a unique skill set and a depth of experience that they were going to have a difficult time finding within other candidates. I don't know how much that was necessarily impacting the final result of the salary that I would get, but this is something that I hope to improve upon in my own career moving forward. And definitely, if anyone has the ability to practice negotiating before an interview, I strongly suggest that you do that, because that is an intimidating place to try it for the first time.
And if I could add, not that I'm necessarily in the gaming industry, but the academy is very similar in our structures. I would say talk to lots of people and ask them. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to ask what they make, but ask what you should be asking, and then ask for at least 10% more.
Yes, Glassdoor is also an excellent resource for figuring out what is a good place to start your salary expectation, and always ask for more than you're seeing listed there.
As a senior about to be graduating, as a transgender member of the community, how does the gaming community, gaming production community look as a way towards transgender women?
I've actually had the opportunity to work with a transgender woman, and fortunately, the company that I worked with her at, and then through the future, I don't understand her to have been treated any differently, truly, than most other employees. I think I don't want to speak to what her experience was like, but because games do have this tight association with fantasy and assuming a different identity than one that you live in the real world with, it is actually pretty open-minded to multiple ways of identifying your gender. I can't promise that you will not have some trials and tribulations as it's related to that, as you may or hopefully not experience in the real world. But yes, I think it's actually a little better than some other industries in that regard.
Thanks for coming today. Oh, sorry, this is a little, I'll just pick it up. Hello. No. I was wondering, so I'm in education and I do a lot with getting teachers to develop their games literacy and understanding the games culture. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, the thoughts of your colleagues are, for us to help develop earlier on girls' interest in games, getting sort of those skill sets in place really early on versus waiting until college or beyond. Because I think it already puts them at a disadvantage. So how do we do it earlier?
Well, one encouraging thing that I've known to have started since I've began my career is that the Girl Scouts of America has a video game design badge. So if girls are interested in pursuing the Girl Scouts, or if your local chapter does not already offer the mentoring necessary for that, I would say that's a great resource in a structured organization. But I think that continuing to create games in the educational space is huge. I mean, that's what got me into games initially, was playing educational games like Oregon Trail as a kid. But I think also encouraging those around you to just play games with girls, cooperatively especially.
Thanks.
Hello. As a sophomore currently in the Games and Animation program, what do you think we can start doing as a group? Because the program involves a lot of collaborative works. What do you think we can do to start like sowing the seeds of equality into how we work every day within our classes?
I think one of the best places to start is having that intention, and then challenging any decisions that you think do not align with that intention. So if you're designing games that feature an avatar, consider, does this need to be male? Could it be female? Could it be either? There's an excellent exercise in writing that may be relevant, where you write out the story of your characters and then you try gender swapping a few of them and see how resilient the story is when you do so. That's a good way to test that your characters are truly have deep, rich character traits. But honestly, I think having the intention is one of the best way to go about that. And then also just making yourselves available to your female colleagues.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll try pulling this up. I'll pick it up. Thank you. Hi, I'm George. I'm a sophomore here. I'm with the journalism school. You mentioned before how in your earlier years you looked up to the woman from Ubisoft who had that unfortunate circumstance with the comics. You also mentioned Kathleen Kennedy. Who are some other role models that women or anyone can look up to in the gaming industry?
Yeah, the first one that jumps to mind is Brenda Romero. I think she's probably one of the oldest icons in the games industry. She's awesome. She speaks at GDC very often. She's a very knowledgeable woman. I'm struggling to remember her last name, but Jane McGonigal is another excellent woman to look into. Jade Raymond is still valid. She's leading Visceral Games in Redwood Shores. And I would say there's a lot of women in the indie game space. Zoe Quinn and Brianna Wu are pretty popular within those spaces. And one of my own personal heroes is actually the woman who's leading ILMxLAB. Her name is Vicky, and I'm blanking on her last name. She's gonna hate me for that. But I actually don't know that I treat women role models especially differently than any male role models, just because they're not necessarily a woman. I don't think makes them unqualified to be someone inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, everyone take a moment with me, please, for thanking Daria for being here today.